And firstly, like this whole 21st century skills thing, like that we are still talking about it in 2025 makes no sense. हो गया 25 साल अभी. If we didn't do it then, we're like, जाने दो. But I think that was a set of skills. Well, futures thinking is actually positioning you for action. Like there
Okay.
is a purpose now. Because like if you say this is the future where I want to end up, this is what the future needs to be, it tells you these are the things I need to be. It gives you sort of a pathway to get there. The
Hmm.
21st century skills may be ones that you need to apply to, you know, but the 21st century skills, if you think about it, they have no purpose. There's no purpose driven in them. Like, okay, creativity, collaboration, like for what reason? So
Interesting.
those become the tools that can help you possibly, right?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Quest for Better Futures. This episode that we're doing right now with Dr. Punya Mishra is called Integrating Imagination in Learning, where we will explore what futures thinking looks like in a pedagogy. We have Punya Mishra with us. Punya Mishra is the Director of Innovative Learning Futures at the Learning Engineering Institute and professor at the Mary Lou Fulton College for Teaching and Learning Innovation at Arizona State University. Hi, Punya. Thank you for giving us your time. It's great
Oh,
to have you here.
thank you, Bhavna. No, it's great. It's great to connect back. It's been a while, so I'm really excited to have this conversation.
Perfect. So, we're working in futures thinking and we're trying to build a pedagogy in futures thinking specific to India. And that is why I wanted to speak to you about it because I know you're working in learning futures as well. So I just want to have you go back to your learning journey and
Okay.
talk and talk a little bit about what do you think, like in your schooling and your early college life, how was the education system preparing you for your futures,
Mhm.
and how was it building resilience, agency in you, or even a lack thereof? How would you
Yeah.
describe your life at that time?
Wow. Wow. Okay. So I think it's really interesting when I think about something like that, right? That schooling and most of school was actually okay. I think that partly not because of what the school was giving me, but because I just found a good network of friends who were like really interested in all kinds of things, and that sort of carried me through school. And then I ended up doing my undergraduate because in India, if you're good in science and math, either medicine or engineering. So I've always wanted to be a physicist when I was a kid. I wanted to study physics, but parents convinced me physics करके क्या होगा, नौकरी नहीं मिलेगी types. So you end up, I ended up doing my undergraduate in engineering, and honestly, I've talked about it in other places as well that I just hated that. That I was this kid who was interested in science and math for sure, but also in like art and literature and poetry and like everything. And so I'm 18 years old. I remember sitting in like the first physics class that we had, and I was writing limericks about like special theory of relativity. That was the kind of guy I was. And 4 years of just nonstop exam, 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 not caring about understanding, not caring about like what these things mean in a deeper sense or broader sense, not getting a sense of the application of it in any way. It just beat it out of me. I mean, I finished 4 years. I honestly felt like a failure at the end of that. I had completely lost any sort of self value. Like I don't have it what it takes to be a scientist or be a whatever, right? And so then, lucky for me, I saw a poster for the Industrial Design Center, and they had this master's program in visual communications. And I'd been writing like science fiction on the side and this kind, thinking of film because I always loved film and cinema. So I said, okay, I'm going to go do a degree in visual communications where I will make educational film, because I love learning and I love ideas, and I was very inspired growing up by like authors like Stephen Jay Gould and Carl Sagan's Cosmos and Bronowski. I mean, it was very important for me, and I'm like, okay, that's what I'm going to do. And luckily, so two things to point out there. In May of 1988, I felt like I was a failure, right? And then I go to IDC, I join this program, and I start thinking of myself as a designer. And suddenly, all these different things that I'd been interested in, like, started making sense. And so by September of that year, I was thinking of myself like, oh, I am a designer. I build things which help people learn or whatever it is, right? Nothing in me had changed. Really, nothing much could change in 4 months.
Right.
But I went from feeling myself to be a failure to finding a direction, finding a career, finding a path. And I still do that thing today. And it's what, 30 years now, whatever number of years, which I shouldn't, makes ages me, right? But that made me realize a couple of things. That one, that when I was doing my undergraduate, that I was not seen as being like one of the better students there, right? By myself and by everybody else. That's okay. And now, when I'm an educator, if there is a student who is not connecting or something, it tells me that maybe the fault is not the students, maybe it's mine. Or maybe, and the second insight is that nothing changed in me in those 4 months, but the system around me changed.
Right.
And so the systems within which we frame education can just transform. So IDC, you'd call faculty by their first name. People would walk in and out. There was no classroom per se. People were walking in. It was just a very this open environment where work was shared publicly. People would come and make fun of your work or compliment you on things that you were doing. So it just became and that taught me a lot. And at that point, the first time I started working with a Mac, this old Macintosh computers with the floppy disks and all of that, and I realized that there was a future that was emerging in this technology, which was going to be at the intersection of something that we want to learn, what the technology can let us do, interactivity and otherwise, and visual images and representation and dynamic representation, so on and so forth. And so film went on the side and I went into educational technology and design. So that's how it sort of the path sort of happened, luckily, because I saw that poster, right? And I think in terms of sort of resilience and agent, about all of that, I think I was just lucky and privileged to grow up in an environment where my parents were very well off, where we had books and libraries, and I could, lived in Delhi, and I could go and watch Jacob Bronowski. I could watch Carl Sagan going to the American, Center, and then I could go and get books from the British Council Library. That's a huge privilege that most people don't have. So I think that thing of agency, I don't think I had it till I went to the designs to IDC. So
That is,
that's when I was like 22, 23 years old, before I felt that I had any sense of agency and decisions, because my mom was not happy about my film banane ja raha hai bachcha, engineering chhod ke. So she would tell people like ye computer graphics kar raha hai, because that seemed more cool.
oh my God.
And so you're dealing with that too, right, of letting your family down, and whatever, all of those things come in.
Your story is reminding me of the student we met last year, and it's so surprising because you're telling me about your college life, which was in late 80s, and we
Uh-huh.
met this guy last year in Odisha, I think in Kalahandi. He was in an ITI learning to be a fitter. He was
Okay.
doing a fitter trade, and he told us about his aspirations. He said, "I love art. I love drawing. I love art. I wanted to be an art teacher
Right.
after 12th, but my parents told me that there's no money in art.
Right.
You and even if you become an art teacher in some random school, it's going to have like you'll have to give exams to become a teacher, etc." So his parents pushed him towards an ITI, and then he's a fitter. He was starting to be a fitter, and he's like, "I all day I just do filing of metals, and I hate this. And if someone had told me this is what it will be, I wouldn't have come here." So
Right.
this is very surprising that you were telling me at that time in engineering you were feeling this, and
Yeah.
almost like, I don't know, 25 years down the line,
Oh,
it's
I'm sure
still
that's been an eternally true story, right? Especially in India, I think, where you get pushed into professions which we think are going to be, successful. I mean, one of the things I feel is like that even if it have gone into physics, and I have no idea, chances are I would have ended up somewhere in the intersection of physics and education,
hmm,
because my interests were always so wide, that so education that way is the perfect home for me, because I could do research on creativity one day, next day do something else altogether, and it's okay, right? So I think, yeah, it worked out for me. I must say that in the long run.
I am
But
the only thing I'm taking away from your story is that the education system didn't kill your curiosity, especially the engineering, 4 years of
Mm.
engineering. But you touched upon this aspect that the education system in India is just like you just, I think,
Well, I mean, And I went to a very good school. I went to modern school, Barakhamba Road. Okay, I mean
Oh,
it's an elite school, right? But I mean, it was okay. Like the class teaching was general. I was just super curious about stuff, so I would just read stuff on my own. Like this is a weird habit I picked up. I don't know, fifth, sixth grade, where when we would get the textbooks, I would sit and read them before the semester started, year
oh
started,
wow.
just for the heck of it. I would just skim it, read it. Like history, to कहानियां है, पढ़ लो.
Really? It's so
Yeah,
it I've not met students who are like this.
yeah. So I was
Never in
weird
my
that
life.
way, right? So what that would mean, though, what I realized later is that when concepts and stuff would come up later, I would have some kind of a frame to fit it in,
Oh wow. Okay.
right? Without even thinking that I'm doing precognitive, whatever. No, I
Hmm.
I was just reading them. These books, hai, padho. Because I would read anything, right? At that age, you give me toothpaste, I will read it. Toothpaste ka packet, I will read it. I was obsessive about
Wow.
reading. So for me, this was not work. It was like fun, you
that
know.
is that is a good quality to have, and I think this is something that we also talk about, no, self learning. So I
Yeah.
think being a self learner, being curious, tinkering, etc., really helps. But from your story I understand that the system was not, you know, helping you
No,
flourish in this role. It was
no.
actually trying to curb it down. You know what, there were some students in ITI Jahangirpuri in Delhi we spoke to, and they were saying that we also recognize that our curriculum is from the 90s, it's not
Right.
changed, we're still learning. They're drawing Windows XP ka diagrams in their notebooks. That's the books they have that they read, and that's the diagram they have to make. This is in Haryana, and the Delhi ITI students were telling us that sometimes they ask questions to the authorities, to the teachers, etc. But the only thing the teachers respond in is suspension, or
Yeah,
saying
yeah.
that it was just
No, that's the thing, right? I mean, and we'll get to that, but I think later in the questions. But like, there are a few things that have become sort of core to my teaching, and one of them is like absolute transparency, right? Everything my students do is public to each other.
that's good.
Everything I do is public. To them, like I will be very upfront about, like, oh, I'm going to change this assignment. And one of the things that, like, this semester that I taught was, if there is any assignment you feel you're doing just to make me happy, tell me and I will remove it.
Oh wow, I wish I had a professor like you.
No, but that's coming from an experience where anybody asking a question, I mean, at least the student is asking a question. Yeah, there are hazar of them who are not asking questions. So I
Exactly.
remember reading this long back. It's like, if there is a kid in your class, when you're teaching something, they keep saying, shaking their head as if they disagree. Like, don't rush in to, like, stop them or correct them, because maybe they're the only one who's listening to you.
That is so interesting.
You know
That
what I
is
mean,
true.
right? So,
Yeah, that's
so
true. Do you think this happens in India also, like the
I'm
Indian
sure it happens in
education
pockets.
system?
I'm sure it
Hmm.
happens in pockets, just as it happens in pockets here. I don't want to anyway claim that every class at Arizona State or at universities or high schools or schools in the US are that open. Not at all. Not at all. And again, this is not to say I'm like a great teacher. There are lots of amazing people, and I think that these kind of innovative things actually have to happen in pockets. If I take this and I say I'm going to institute this format across the university, it's going to get bastardized.
Hmm.
You see, that's the thing. It's like, what we have to scale is mindsets. We don't scale programs, because the moment you scale programs, they get they get corrupted.
Interesting. Say more about this. Like, what do you mean? How does
So
one scale mindset?
so before we come to changing mindset, there is this, there's a thing called Campbell's law. And Doug Campbell was a researcher. So he said that any time we make any indicator for decision making, right? Any social indicator. So we can, let's say in a classroom, we say grades, we say
Hmm.
this or that. The moment we make that the basis for decision making, it starts, it's will be open to corruption pressures,
Interesting.
right? Which means that it will get corrupted. So if you look at, let's say we say, okay, all schools will be graded on how much the students learn. The moment you say that, you're going to have teachers who are going to help students cheat in the exam, because their livelihood is going to depend on it,
Yeah.
right? And so that's why when people talk about how do we scale this to the level of X or Y, whatever that scale may be, I get a little nervous, because moment you take something which works in a local context and you say you're going to blow it up,
Hmm.
you are now forgetting to recognize how contextually grounded that set of decisions was.
That makes
So,
sense.
right, so what I want people to take away from the example of my class would be something like transparency, would be something like that anything we do was always following the sort of Dewey's four principles of what is motivating to students, you know, to learners: inquiry, communication, construction, and expression. So everything we do has to have some four elements of that,
Hmm.
right? And that any demonstration of your knowledge needs to be public, not to the professor.
But these are like you said that these are things that happen in pockets.
Yeah.
But then, like coming back to and my second question, if you
Yeah.
remember, coming back to the Indian education system, then
Mhm.
if what do you think it was designed for, and
Yeah.
why is it falling short in fulfilling the promises it was making? Like I remember, as in I don't remember, I wasn't there, but in the beginning it was education was a public good. It was supposed to
Right.
take get people out of poverty, develop them, etc., etc. And there are so many people, so many economists, everyone's talking about it. But the current public education system, the way it is, and like I was giving you that example that you in your university in your bachelor's in late 80s and right now a student in an ITI in
Same
2024,
experience. Yeah, same experience.
same
Sure. Yeah.
experience.
But again, I think to me, the more telling story is the one that you just said about in Haryana, I think you said, right? Where, like, if a student asks a question, the only response the system has is suspension. And I don't blame the teachers in that situation, honestly, because the teachers, if they raise a question, they also face the same consequences. So it's this hierarchy of consequences. Like
True.
nobody is a bad person in this, it's the system. I mean, that's why I sort of emphasize the story about like my going from Bits Pilani to go to IDC. I could not have changed in 3 or 4 months.
Hmm.
It's just not possible. I was the same person, but I felt a completely different person. And so I think that, and coming back to the purpose of education, I mean, and that's something we can debate, right? I mean, and I think that's a very important debate to have, because there are conflicting sort of goals that we can have. They're not necessarily conflicting. We can have multiple goals. There's the goal of citizenship and flourishing, then there is the whole goal of like economic, sustain, that you can have a job and you can be sustained in what you do. And sometimes those can be in conflict with each other,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
But I think that at the end of the day, it has to be driven by what the learner wants, needs, because they can't see 10 years in the future. Yeah, which is where I think the conversation turns to futures thinking in some way. But they are thinking of here now, and too much of education, I think, the answer has become trust us, you will need it in the future,
That is true.
right? Too much of a trigonometry क्यों कर रहे हैं? Trust us, you will need it. Photosynthesis क्यों सीख रहे हैं? Trust us, you will need it in the future. History क्यों? It's that. And I think the more we think about it in terms of like, okay, how is it helping me now? It doesn't have to be like it's going to get me a job. It can be something just as an idea or something that way. But we have to start with where the learner is,
Yeah,
and trust
that
that
is.
their questions are coming from a genuine place. And I think the biggest thing is that's one thing that I felt in India, is that it was always felt as if the student was out to cheat the system,
Yeah.
not recognizing that they're not. I mean, they are kids or whatever age they are. I mean, at the end of the day, they want what's right for them too. And if
And
the exam has no meaning, I mean, I've talked about this publicly, which is another podcast, which is like, what was the time that I cheated? I cheated
hmm,
when I was in Bits Pilani. Do I am I proud? Absolutely not. But the reason I'm willing to share it, even though it's kind of humiliating to say that, I never cheated after that. Because after that, what I was learning meant something to me. This didn't mean anything to me. It just meant get this damn exam over with and get on with this thing. And then I can go back and hang out with my buddies and, drink or like write short stories or whatever, you know.
yeah. You know, like your story again is reminding me a little bit of this that you felt in Bits Pilani that it was your failure that you were not able to
Mm,
perform or score, etc.
for sure.
We have met countless number of students in our last 2 years of research where every young this narrative, there's a systemic narrative saying that young people don't have the skills,
Yeah.
they don't have the mindset, they don't have the skills, they are not employable, etc.
Yeah.
And then we go on the ground and we see these young people, they are trying to, they're just grabbing degrees, they're grabbing certificates, they're trying to do everything that's in
Desperate.
their understanding. Yeah.
Yes, they're
And
desperate.
they're not lazy, like this
No,
narrative is they're lazy, they don't want skills, etc. But that's not true. We
no,
meet such
not at all.
smart students, these ITI students who are
Yeah,
drawing Windows XP in their notebook, but online they are learning graphic design, video editing, they're learning like even data science. Some student was learning, some student was learning digital marketing. But when you then ask them, okay, do you want to like make this your work, they will not be able to say that okay, this might be an employable skill, because they've been told that this is wrong, what we teach you in this institution is right.
yeah, yeah. No, I mean that's the other thing that I've been thinking a lot about recently, especially with this AI stuff, is where is learning really happening, right? And I think a lot more learning is happening outside of these sort what we call educational spaces than
Yeah.
we would like to admit, and in both good and bad ways. In the sense that because all said and done, educational institutions, because somebody is deciding on the curriculum, there is a certification, there is some process to at least have some guardrails. But
Yeah.
if you're getting your medical information or health information from TikTok, that really worries me, right? Because it's somebody whose sole purpose is to increase their influence, not to give you the right information.
Yeah.
you know
True.
to get more followers, and saying more random arbitrary things might get you more followers, right?
Yeah.
So I worry about that, but I think that the fact that that learning is happening in a lot many more spaces,
Oh,
in ways
definitely.
that students feel much more agency over, and that makes sense to them here now. There's a difference
Yeah.
between a job and a career, and I think, well, Chris Rocker, there's a routine where like he's peeling potatoes, and they said like,
Okay.
how did you feel at that time? And he says like, the other guy and me were both peeling potatoes. He said he saw it as a job. I mean, he saw it as a career, I saw it as a job,
Hmm.
right? My career is going to be very different. This is something I need to do to get to the next step, whatever it may be, right? And I think that
Yeah.
we are really not providing opportunities for that. And that's where I think, circling back to futures thinking, it's like, if we have this conversation, somebody wants to be an influencer, and say, okay, where do you see this going 5, 10 years from now?
Hmm.
Like, could you sustain this? Is this sustain? Then, but what are you learning from here that you can apply? Like, does
Hmm.
it mean that you can now apply to a marketing school, or you can go to an ad agency? Then that's a stable job.
Yeah.
Things that way. So that, I think, becomes more interesting then. But building
That,
from their natural resources, what they care about, what they do, I think becomes critical in that.
yeah, I think when students say they want to be influencers, we also try to tell them, okay, there is this AI that is coming, and there are AI influencers now as well. So how do
I
you
know.
think the future of influencing is
I
going to
know.
be? And a young student said that so TikTok is banned in India. So this
Uh,
young girl was like, TikTok is banned, and they banned it overnight. What if they ban YouTube as well? So my job will go. So these anxieties are still there, but they still feel that influencing से पैसा मिल सकता है, as compared to like out of an ITI you get a job, you get an apprenticeship of 8,000 a month, which is
right,
really low for to
right.
sustain yourself in this economy. So that I think becomes a problem. But I think you had mentioned in this bit only that students are learning from everywhere, and they're learning things online. They're learning things from Instagram, YouTube, etc. What we found on the field, which is something I think would interest you, very few students knew AI. Very few students knew Chat GPT. But who knew Chat GPT? There was this girl that we met in ITI Delhi. She was using ChatGPT for all decisions of her life, even what to wear. Like if she wants to go out in the evening, she will ask ChatGPT what to wear. And like, and then we made them like write stories of the future, like what do you think technology will look like in 2047, because India is doing this, India at 2047 will complete
Right,
100 years of independence.
right, right,
So we
right,
were making young people write stories on that, and she was not able to write. She's like, can I please chat GPT it? You know? So that sort of dependency we
oh
saw
yeah,
there.
for sure, for sure. And that's, I think, one of the things that you said. This is a new HBR study, I think I wrote about it on my website recently, where personal uses for sort of companionship and things that way have just shot up
Short down. Yeah,
dramatically over the past year and over other uses. So that's kind of interesting, sort of scary kind of a space there,
exactly.
you know, where you give it a lot more power than it deserves to have. It's not that smart, or it's smart in like weird ways.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's interesting.
But one thing, coming back to futures thinking, one thing I have heard in all of your podcasts, in all your learning futures podcasts, is this line that many people have said: education institutes teach history, but they don't teach futures.
Uh-huh.
What does that mean? Like, how does one even go about teaching futures?
Sure.
Because futures is something that has not happened, right? It's like all
Right.
in your imagination. So,
Right.
how does one teach futures?
So I think that statement actually can be unpacked in more than one way. So, because one way of thinking about it is like we're saying, let's not teach history. I don't think that's what it is being said here, which is being said like, let's teach history so that we can learn from it for the future. There's this quote by Santana or somebody like that: those who forget history are destined to repeat it.
Yeah.
Right. And so
Yeah.
if we have to, and education is always about the future. I mean, there's just, it's never about the here now. It's always about what will you do now that will help improve your situation in the future. Like if it'll make you a better person, make you wiser, get you a job, whatever the case may be, right? And so I think that what I really liked about that articulation of this group when they were talking about the learning futures was that they flipped that equation. That they said that we have to learn history, but it has to be informing us of going forward, right?
Mm.
And there's this, I think Nehru said it somewhere where he talked about like that our feet should be firmly in the past and we are in the present and our eyes are on the future. And I think that the learning futures approach is basically that. It recognizes the importance of history, but says just knowing history, then it becomes a dead set of facts. But now, if it is going to inform how I think about what's going to happen later, right? So
Yeah.
let's say, example from personal experience, when I look at myself, how I responded to the advent of social media back in like 6, 7, 8. Arab Spring is happening, this and that. I'm like, oh wow, this is the democratization of knowledge. This is the next Gutenberg revolution. Not recognizing that there are far stronger forces which are going to take this technology and manipulate it and make it just about engagement and locking you into their site and extreme content and all, not realizing that, right? And now I look back, so that's me looking back on my history and saying, dang Punya, you were an idiot, you should have known better. You are well read, you are well thought, but you didn't think about that. You got swayed by the shiny toy and then, so now when I talk about AI, you'll see I'm always talking about the long-term consequences of it. What does it mean when AI influences take over? What does it mean to have a bot which is always going to pander to you, which is going to be your friend? And friendships have lots of friction in them. I don't think of a single friend of mine that I've had 100% great relationship with all the time.
Correct.
My
Yeah.
wife and I squabble all the time. That's human life. And what happens when you have a companion who's always going to pander to whatever you want to hear, whatever you want to say? So that's me thinking of the future based on my knowledge of my personal failings, and an understanding of history. So to me, that's the sort of mix that we need to be thinking about.
That is interesting because right now, the way we are talking about AI in education institutes, it's very utopic. Like, there is this new
Ah,
technology that's going to help you, that's going to change your life, things are going to become easy. Very, utopic vision of tech. And
right.
a lot of AI curricula is being implemented in ITIs in schools. But no, none of those are talking about AI from like what long term consequences will it
Yeah,
have
for
on our
sure.
society.
For sure. I mean, I think even short term, even the example that you gave of this person who's using it for every decision, right? I mean, what gives that AI that power to do that? And
Yeah.
then like how much of our own critical thinking are we abrogating to that? You know.
So, will you say future thinking is just this? Future thinking is to learn from your past and sort of
No, I think
project
there
it
are a
into the
couple of
future?
other things there as well because just I mean, it's easy to say learning from the past, right? But what parts of the past do you pay attention to? What parts of the thing do you like? Are you thinking in terms of systems? Are you thinking, because I could just say this is an individual story, right? Fine. But my being able to acknowledge and recognize, and it took me a while to recognize that transformation that happened over 4 months, and to say, oh, that's a systemic transformation,
Right.
right? I didn't just find something, that there was something there, that some magic was there where I could go in and be myself. That's a system. And sort of starting to, so recognizing that the way social media or the internet ended up being, if it had been a subscription model, it would be completely different. If I'm paying 5 paisa for everything I post on Facebook, then I own Facebook. But since
Interesting.
Facebook is free, Facebook is now owned by the advertisers and what they want.
Hmm.
You see, so starting to understand those systemic things, then it starts telling you, like, oh, I think I'm going to do X and Y in the future. There are going to be systemic barriers to that. Doesn't mean I give up. It means recognizing that there are bigger forces at work that I then need to navigate. So I need to learn how to do X or
Right.
Y.
But what you said about social media, and you just gave this alternate possibility of how social media could exist, which was if you gave 5 paisa per
Yeah,
post, you would own it. So I think that is also something which is directly relates to futures thinking, right? Like you,
absolutely. Exactly. Yeah. Now that directly, because then it tells you that, oh, decisions made at a certain point have consequences down the road. So one of the best analogies for sort of futures thinking that I had is that somebody said, there are a lot of science fiction time travel stories where the person goes back in time and they, like, kill Hitler, or make sure that Hitler doesn't have a bad experience with his first girlfriend or whatever, right? And the world is different. And they say, actually, we are all living in time machines.
how
What
come?
we are living in is, we are moving in time. So let's take good decisions now so that we have a better future.
But that's the thing, no,
No, we
like
see what I'm
the
saying, right? But it's kind of a cute thought experiment, right? It's like, yeah,
it is
let's,
very interesting.
right? So the kinds of decisions we make today are going to have ripple effects down the road.
You know what? You've given me such an interesting thought right now. Like how people say they come back into the past to change something, and futures
Yeah.
thinking is actually projecting or sort of thinking about multiple possibilities, which sort of
Exactly.
brings you to the past, and you're like, okay, what do I need to change
What
now
do
so
I
that
need
I
to do
don't
now?
reach there?
Yes.
You
How do I
know?
prevent Hitler from meeting his girlfriend and getting his heart broken? Whatever the equivalent is. You know what I mean, right? Like, what do I do now?
Yeah.
Right. So that's exactly it. Because now, I mean, the social media one is a great example, because we can say, how can we structure the economics of AI? Because foundationally, it's an economic thing that
Yeah.
is not based on grabbing my attention and sucking me in and collecting my data and using that to further suck me in. Right? That's the question to ask.
So tell me, okay, so if this is what futures thinking is, how is it different from 21st century skills?
Oh, so first of all, I don't know. I don't define futures thinking. There are people who are experts at that. This is my version of thing. I want to be very clear.
It
Ki
works
I
for me.
don't speak. I don't speak for the futures thinking community. This is Punya random rambling. On things he's been thinking about. Right. Um, I think the difference between the two, and firstly, like this whole 21st century skills thing, like that we are still talking about it in 2025 makes no sense. Ho gaya 25 saal abhi. If we didn't do it then, we're like, jane do. But I think that was a set of skills. Well, futures thinking is actually positioning you for action. Like there
Okay.
is a purpose now, because like if you say this is the future where I want to end up, this is what the future needs to be. It tells you these are the things I need to be. It gives you sort of a pathway to get there. The
Hmm.
21st century skills may be ones that you need to apply to, you know but the 21st century skills, if you think about it, they have no purpose. There's no purpose driven in them, like, okay, creativity, collaboration, like for what reason? So
Interesting.
those become the tools that can help you, possibly, right? That can
Yeah.
help you. And if I mean, with Quest, we had written this piece about like this different 21st century skills, domain, what how, and the values that you bring to it. All of those still require a purpose,
Interesting. Yeah.
right? Like, if I want to be a manager of a company, then the kinds of knowledge I need to pick up are very different if I want to be the head engineer somewhere
Hmm.
of the same company. I could be in the same company, same level, but I'm a manager, I'm an engineer, lead engineer. It's a different set of skills.
Yeah.
right? And so that's how you can start thinking, okay, what kind of knowledge do I need? What kind of like critical thinking skills or communication that I need to have? And what kinds of values do I need to bring to the work? So these become tools, but there is no
Mm.
goal associated with 21st century skills. There's no goal. It's just like, yeah, these are a bunch of skills, but the purpose has to come from somewhere else. And maybe one way is futures thinking.
So you're saying futures thinking sort of gives you that purpose, gives you this vision of a desired future that you
Right.
want to move
That
towards,
you
and
want to
then
move to.
these 21st century skills become those
Could be.
tools.
Yeah, could be, right? Could be. So
Mm.
I think the only thing to me, if the futures thinking thing has to work, it has to bring a sort of a systems thinking kind of an approach to it. It cannot just be mere wishful thinking. There has to be
Mm.
an understanding of the broader system within which you're functioning, and that it will throw up roadblocks. It will throw up this, and figuring out ways around those, that becomes critical, right? And
Right.
so to me, futures thinking, just speculating, is not enough. It has to be about like how grounded is it. So there's that tension there between like imagination and also now grounding that imagination.
So, okay, so you're saying futures thinking is not just about imagination, though imagination becomes an important part of it.
For sure.
But then how would you describe it working in a classroom? How would futures thinking look like? What would it look like in a classroom?
So I was teaching a class of freshmen. These are going to be teachers, and they're all like 18 years old. So I said, the assignment that I gave them last end of the semester assignment was, imagine you are, this is pre-chat GPT, but like, imagine you are a teacher who's been teaching for 30 years. You're retiring today, and there's a retirement function for you. Everybody's come, and there's a whole bunch of 22-year-old new teachers joining the school, right? What I want you to do is go back 30 years. So this was, I was teaching this, let's say in 2020, let's say, right? So go back to 1990. Go on Wikipedia, go on this, and find out what the world was like in 1990. No cell phones, no
Hmm.
smartphones, no this, no the internet, barely there. Da, 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 da. So what was teaching like when you started?
Right.
Okay, and now what advice are you going to give these 22-year-olds who are starting in 2020 about what their life and career is going to look like? What changes will they see? That is a way of sort of looking back to look to the future, because people don't realize, I mean, when you're 18 years old, you think this is the world. Like, no. Like,
Yeah.
if you have a career in this field, you're entering into this field, you're going to be in this field for 25, 30 years. And you think it's going to be the same that you started in 2020 that is going to be in 2050? No. The only way we can even imagine what that could be like is going back 30 years and saying, dang, stuff changed. you know it's, it's a very different world. I mean, I grew up in Mizoram. I didn't have electricity for the first 2 years of my life.
Oh,
Like,
really?
first, not my life, but when we were in Mizoram for 2 years, and I remember running from room to room, and here I am talking about AI. It's one
Yeah.
person. I'm not even that old. I'll be 60 this later this year, right? In that much time, I've gone from no electricity to a technology which is talking to me and is possibly destroying the environment on the side. I mean, I'm not trying to say everything has been great, is what the point I'm trying to make. But that's one person's life,
Yeah.
right?
It's,
And so that's what I mean is like, if you get kids to think that, so push them a little bit outside of where they are now backwards. All that
mm,
information is there. You can go and look up the greatest inventions in the last 20 years or 30 years of technology history and whatever, right? Look at that, and then they say, okay, 10 साल में इतना हुआ है, अगले 10 साल में क्या होने वाला है? तो तुम जो सोच रहे हो, तुम इन्फ्लुएंसर बनने वाले हो, 10 साल में वो रहेगा ही नहीं, फिर क्या करोगे?
true. And I think moving people across these timelines, it just opens up your
Yeah,
imagination and thinking so much,
yeah,
right?
yeah. I mean, the other one that I mean, I did this for teachers, but you could do more generically. It's like jobs that didn't exist 30 years ago that exist now. Now predict
Yeah,
what jobs are going to be 30 years from now that you can't even imagine,
that's true. But
right?
one thing that we've noticed on the field is when we talk about futures, no, for example, the climate futures work that we did, we were we were sort of asking students to, okay, this is what the scientists are saying, that let's say in 2040 Bhavnagar in Gujarat is, the sea levels might rise. So
Mm.
what will happen? And we brought them to this future. They were thinking about things, and it brought a lot of anxiety in them. Ki, oh no, what if we don't exist? Like, what if we die? What if we have to
Mm.
migrate, etc.? So there's a lot of anxiety when you talk about futures, and especially these kind of disruptions, like talking about AI. Oh, it might take away my job, or
Right.
talking about climate. That's obviously going to affect
Obviously going
us
to destroy
really
everything.
badly.
Right? Yeah, yeah, yeah.
So then, how do we? And this is something that we are sort of working on right now, to use that anxiety as a site for transformation.
Yeah, yeah.
Like, would you have any points
No, I
around
think
this?
I was thinking about, that's a great question, and that's the one. So I think that anxiety at any level cannot be good for you,
Right.
right? Just as an emotion, it is a negative emotion. It pulls you down. It darkens everything, right? The And I don't have the answer to this, but I think if we can convert that anxiety into a willingness to embrace ambiguity, like I'll push myself in that ambiguity till I'm like getting stressed, and just knowing that at the end of the day something will come up, right? I'll figure something out or something that way. That may be a little extreme, but I think if we can convert anxiety into an appreciation of ambiguity, because an
Mm.
ambiguity means that you have some choices there, right? Because ambiguous है, ये करना चाहिए कि वो करना चाहिए, which is different from anxiety. Oh my god, दुनिया टूटने वाला है, which is power, is non-agentic, right? There is no power in anxiety. I mean, part of the reason why anxiety happens is because you feel powerless.
Yeah. Yeah.
So the
True.
question then becomes, is like, okay, where can we reclaim some power in that space? So when I used to work with teachers in the Chicago public schools, which is a very regimented, just terrible, and a lot of the things we were doing were very creative in the workshops and the classes we would do, and they would come and say like, I can't do most of these things, I won't be allowed to do most of these things in my classroom. So one of the conversations we would have towards the end, when we were talking about leadership in within a given space, is like knowing the difference between rules and conventions.
Mm.
So don't break rules, but you can bend the conventions.
Interesting.
And so there are things, every person in their space has some agency. So try to identify that. That's what's going to give you the opening, hopefully.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. And the whole point of ambiguity. So we keep saying that future is uncertain, right? Like,
Right.
you can't, no matter how much you try, you can't predict it.
Right.
So that being okay with that uncertainty, I think, is the important
Is
aspect of
critical.
futures thinking.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
But I like your point of saying that how do you transform that anxiety into
Yeah.
some way into agency? And actually, to be very honest, I've seen this on the field through our climate futures work, where young people felt very anxious thinking of these futures of climate
Right.
change, where things will just, you know, it will all be
Yeah.
dead and gone. And then they were like, okay, we don't want this, we want something else to happen in the future. And then if this is what I want, then what do I have to do right now? So they started asking questions,
Right.
they started questioning their curriculum, saying, why is this not on our, why are they not teaching us, why is
Right.
this not an election agenda, those kind of things. So I
Right.
think that little bit of agency sort of
For sure.
does
Yeah.
happen.
And I think being honest also, I mean, one of the things I used to tell the teachers is like, I don't want you getting fired, right? And
Yeah.
so then find that space where you can find the allies within that school, find the space where you can do, maybe it's an after school program that you want to do this fun stuff with kids with, right? Okay,
Yeah.
because you have a very rigid curriculum and you're supposed to step lockstep through them. Like, okay, right, that's fine. Recess. Ask kids, hey, those who want to stay back at recess, we can have lunch together and we can talk about science. Okay, you made some, like, you have some control over things, and I think that is like the crucial thing.
Yeah, no, that's true. But then, since you're talking about an educator, I wanted to ask, if, let's say, we do have to impart future thinking and sort of empower young people with future thinking, what should be, or what is one of the ways in which we can do it? Like, what is the role of an educator in this? Because especially in India, if you see, like, in schools or in ITIs, teachers have a very set idea of the future. Like, there's a course called stenography in ITIs even now. and
Oh,
we and we tell them that, there's AI which takes notes in all our meetings. And I personally spoke to this teacher of stenography in one of the ITIs, and he said that Okay, AI can take your notes, but can AI bring one book from that corner to here? So that is what my students can do. And that is why stenography will always remain. So teachers themselves are in denial. Teachers themselves probably are not open to thinking of multiple futures. Then
I know.
how, what do
I
we do here basically is my question.
I know. Wow, I really, that's such a that I mean, at the end of the day, it comes back to that scaling sort of idea that I talked about before, right? That's why, when Young Zhao and I often talk about this, like he does a lot of work like visiting schools across the world, and one of the things he says is that where he has really found good things happening is in pockets within systems,
Yeah.
and so what he has come to believe is like, school within schools, or where different things can happen, and there, because it's sort of a side thing, nobody's really worried about beating it down or that is out to take over the world, but then a lot of innovation can happen within that. And so I really have a very hard time grasping, like, even the idea of a school, let alone India and all its education system. It's way beyond like what my mind can grasp. But
Hmm.
I do believe in the power of individuals and smaller groups or smaller communities within that larger system to do interesting things. You know,
Hmm.
so like I gave the example of the class that I taught. I'm sure there are 50 other faculty members at ASU teaching sociology and teaching engineering and teaching whatever, who are doing fascinating things in their domain, right? And the question then, I think the systemic question becomes is A, how do we find those people, recognize those groups? And B, how do we not say, oh, we are going to do this across the entire system, but rather say, oh, we recognize you, we give you an award, we say, oh, wow, that's great, so that other people can feel, oh, I can also try different things in my space,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
That's, I think that's the way forward. It's not a grand solution, but what it does, it gives permission.
That's true. And also, like, just giving permission to teachers to also
Yeah,
experiment
yeah.
and maybe fail. I think teachers are also so bogged down with like just finishing curricula,
Trust me,
etc.
they won't fail, because the system is failing anyway right now. You think anybody trying something different is going to create something worse than what it is in most situations? I don't think so. I really don't think so. It's a sad commentary, but I don't think so.
So, if let's say one has to incorporate future thinking in classrooms, if you can go back to your, let's say, your school life, how would have wanted futures thinking to be incorporated? Like, did you want it to be like a post school thing, or would it make sense if you incorporate it in subjects?
I think it lends itself to some subjects more than others for sure. Like we've talked about history. I think it'll lend itself to sort of language and writing and, English or whatever subject, literature, basically, classes on that. Um, but I mean, it could lend itself. I mean, if it's like a school wide kind of thing that you're thinking of, it could lend itself to science and math as well. You know, there's so we did a project once with a local school district, which is not futures thinking, but I'm sharing that as an idea for you to think about. So this principal in that school, really Renaissance man kind of guy, very interesting guy. He felt that students were seeing the classes as being disconnected from each other. Like they would go to a science class, physics, and then they would walk into music and like history, none of that. So he said, can we just design a curriculum for these 2 years? It was 2 year high school, right? Ninth, 10th, or something like that. And can we design a curriculum for them where everything that they study is focused on one part of time? So he chose, because that's what he was interested in. And he's like, that's fine. He chose First World War, Great Depression, Second World War. That's the time period we're going to cover in literature. So if we are reading poems, we're reading stories, they'll all be from that period of time. In history, of course, you're doing that. In math, you're going to every problem that you're going to design is going to be like around that time. So when students go from one class to the other, they're just getting different slices of that period of time. So if you're looking at, so one of the maths teachers, for instance, came up with an example of like, they were doing like density and stuff. So tanks getting stuck in mud in the First World War.
Interesting.
Like, right. And now, you put planks. Why do you put planks? So the pressure per square unit area is different, so on and so forth, right? So now the teachers are collaborating, everybody's thinking
Yeah.
together, and the students, most importantly. So when they go to band class or music class, they're playing music from the, whatever swing era. And so that's one way of possible, and I love that. I wish more schools would think that way, because it also empowers teachers, because suddenly the curriculum, they're covering the same curriculum, but they're now doing it in a different way.
Yeah,
you know
and this just gives me an idea. Like, let's say if we ask young people to imagine a world or create a future world, maybe they can look at it from different subject
Lenses, subject lenses. Yeah,
lenses.
yeah,
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 that would be that would be a very interesting thing to do.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. you know
interesting.
yeah.
So, okay,
So yeah, that
yeah,
was one project which I really felt that the idea behind it was actually pretty cool.
yeah, yeah, definitely. And I think even for teachers, it'll be like you were saying, teachers were collaborating and sort of
Yeah,
like, what role would you say organizations like Quest Alliance should play in equipping the education system to prepare young people to thrive in in their futures?
I think some of the work, I mean, and again, I'm not very familiar at this moment of all the work that's been happening over the past few years, but I would say, just from what I know of the organization, that the work that you do across different contexts, I think that's really important, because the contexts also matter in these situations, and to be able to highlight that, but also develop sort of tools and approaches to thinking about exactly the kind of conversation we're having now, is like, how can this be done well? And at
Mm,
the end of the day, it is really about the learners, right? It's about those individuals. And I mean, I keep going back to this thing about like students really, we feel that disconnected from school, and they have every right to be, because they don't see the purpose of what they're doing.
yeah,
And maybe this futures thinking is one approach to give it some kind of a framing and a purpose.
yeah,
you know that there is a goal here, that what is it going to look like, and what does it mean for you, and what does it mean for us, because both those are slightly different questions, and both need to be asked. you know and how we define what us is. So I think that line of work to me is very productive, for the simple reason that most school, or most learning right now, at least formal learning systems, um, the student is expected to bring that into that space, and they often don't have any background or understanding to be able to articulate that question in any sensible way.
yeah. No, that's true.
If futures is thinking is a lens that you can use, I'm sure there are others. I'm not, I don't want to claim that that's the only one, but if that's one, then I think that's a really powerful one. The challenge that I feel in the futures thinking thing is, we tend to fall into deterministic sort of traps very often. That AI आएगा तो ऐसा होगा, ये and it's usually technology that drives it, that
Hmm.
kind of thinking, and the world is a lot more complex than that. And how you get students to sort of recognize that complexity, the
Yeah.
systems that are often are determining our fate. you know I mean, I recently was giving this talk somewhere, and I gave this example. I said, like, imagine you were somebody in 2006 and 7, and you said, I am not going to use social media. I'm not going to get Instagram. I'm not going to Snapchat, Facebook, LinkedIn, blah, blah, nothing. And you lived your life happily, right? You had friends. Something. Your world that you live in today, despite your having contributed zero to the social media universe, is dramatically transformed because of it,
True.
right? So it's not an individual. So framing it as an individual choice is also making a mistake. So I would love for futures thinking to be more complicated, to end up with more questions, rather than like ऐसा होगा फिर ऐसा होगा. Like it's a domino theory of history, right? That it can be many different things. I think that's my worry when I think about futures thinking, especially when novices do it. It's very easy to go that X will lead to Y kind of a thing, and just complicating that is always a good thing.
Yeah. So you're saying one shouldn't be deterministic in the sense that this is one future that will happen and this is
Yeah,
what you
or
need.
even how the logic of how we think about it. So I think some conversations always about, let's say, different groups have created competing futures. It's like, okay, why is this more plausible than that? And what if, like, what would make this happen versus that happen? And questioning those things, those decisions marks that we have made along the way, I think it
Hmm.
just makes the thing a little more nuanced,
Right.
which is a good thing.
Right. So also looking at it from like a systems lens and also saying that what are the different systems interacting and what are like
Right.
social implications or
Exactly.
consequences that are going to
Exactly.
emerge because of this
Right. I mean,
future.
you can look at any kind of social. I mean, this comes back to that Campbell's Law thing, right? I mean, if you look at, like, okay, here is a group of people who have been marginalized in this country for like the past 5, 6,000 years, right? And we're going to have reservations, which are going to, but then you have the backlash. It's like, oh, merit is not being recognized. And then you have this other backlash to the backlash. And then you have people who are like faking their birth certificate so that they can, I mean, think of the
Did we
ripple
think of
effects,
this? Yeah,
right? I mean, of very well intentioned at some level, and Ambedkar, let's say, had a different view of like voting and stuff like that. I'm sure if that would have been instituted, there would be huge ripple effects of that too. And so,
definitely.
just sort of helping people think that way, I think is a really powerful thing because I think it
Yeah.
helps us understand our current situation also, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, thinking about, okay, this is where India will be in 2025. I'm sure if people must have thought about it, there might be certain decisions that they would have
Could have been
taken which
different.
were
Yeah,
different.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Even in terms of education, I would say.
I would pretty sure. Yeah, yeah, for
Yeah.
sure.
Now that I've told you enough stories about, let's say, what is happening on the ground in India, let me ask you a fun question. And what would be your ideal archetype of a classroom?
Firstly, I wouldn't have it in a room. It wouldn't be a room. I think that's the first thing, right? Just open that up because learning is and that comes back to the transparency thing, right? uh, there's nothing to be ashamed of. Why are we locking ourselves into boxes where we learn? Like, why should we? And so I think that openness at multiple levels, I think, would be important. Transparency, like, why are we doing this thing, and allowing students to ask questions. And I think in terms of the educator, to think of them as being sort of a designer of an experience for the students, where there is some content to be learned, but more than the content at some level is like how you're approaching the problems in that field. So, so if you're a physicist, there is a certain perspective. So I read this somewhere where somebody was like, what is computer science? And they said computer science is getting rocks to think. Like,
How come?
computer engineering is getting rocks. So rocks, that's silica,
Oh, oh,
right? And I
okay.
said that is such a beautiful encapsulation, right?
Interesting. Oh, yeah.
And now you're like, oh, I do X in that thing, but essentially what I'm doing is taking rocks and making them think. That's insane. That's a beautiful thing. And so thinking that way, that not just that you're giving them information about a certain domain, but that domains exist or disciplines exist because there are ways of looking at the world which are productive and useful. Sociology or
Yeah.
astronomy or whatever. Those are ways of slicing the physics, math. That's what you want people to get away from the end of it.
But thank you so much for taking out the time. This
No,
was
it is fun. It was fun.
amazing.
It was great fun. I really appreciated it and enjoyed it.